So welcome everybody to the live stream. It's good to have you here. So now that we are running live, just a little introduction to circus rigging and safety. This is an information site to do with safety and circus rigging, clearly. We try and get funding and support from interested parties. If you're interested in assisting us with producing more information like this, or if you like the articles or the videos that we produce, then please subscribe to the site. You get access anyway to all of our live streams for free. Some of the training material that we are creating and have created is for members only, and if it's public safety information, then we'll publish that for free. So go to Circus Rigging and Safety, and that will take you, if I'm in the right place, to this site here. I want to introduce you to the guests that I have for today. So firstly, of course that one's worked out the wrong way round. This is obviously supposed to be Chris, but let's switch in here first. So Chris, hi. Are you there, Chris? Have we got you? Oh, we've got a little interruption to Chris's feed. Can you hear us okay, Chris? Oh, hang on, I've got an audio alert going on here. Those, that's better. How about that? Can you hear us, Chris?
Much better.
Zoom this time getting in our way of deciding what we can and can't hear. So I'll deal with that later and carry on from there. So welcome, Chris. Thank you for joining us.
Pleasure.
So the purpose today is going to be discussing three different domains over which we can document rigging, and let's get into that in just a minute. But also what I would like to do is also to introduce the other party here, is Heidi, who is Aerial Edge with Gabrielle, who is waiting for us to involve them in part of the conversation with regards to the equipment that we're inspecting. So we've got a setup of equipment on the table that we're looking at, and then we want to understand where we would record it and under what different circumstance we would record the inspections and what we would need to record for each one. So hopefully, if the video's working live from that end, if Heidi can give us a wave. Or yes, we're working. This is good to have. All right, so Chris, could we review perhaps what we'd think of as the three different circumstances under which we would inspect or record things differently?
Yeah, I think in simple terms, it really is important to identify the equipment that you're using in terms of whether it poses a risk to anybody. If it doesn't, then there's no real reason to inspect it. If it does, you've got to decide if it's being used simply as apparatus or whether it's actually being used as lifting equipment. If it is being used as lifting equipment, then there are some extra requirements that you've got to make or are made on you under legislation. If you're an employer or if you're providing that equipment to be used to lift somebody in what you might describe as a work activity, which is always difficult, but I think we have to make a few assumptions here that if you're a studio or a club, something like that, it would be treated as a work activity.
Very good. So if we're looking, so we've got a work activity is one area. So what would be the differences between each of those, if you could summarize that?
Between a work activity and a voluntary activity?
So we're looking there at work activity being one type
Yes.
that we're recording. There's a couple of other types that we're looking at as well.
So presumably referring to inspecting things under the Lola regulations.
Yeah, or possibly working at height regs.
Right. Well, work at height regs, it's a difficult one. I've never really investigated the detail because I think most of what we use, it's easier to term work equipment. But bear in mind that under the work at height regs, that would cover things like scaffold platforms, ladders, even bosun's chairs and things. But that's when you start to break into the sort of the more niche areas, shall we say. And I think it's probably not a good idea to get too confused by that. So simple distinction: are you providing it for other people to use, or are you using it yourself for a legitimate work activity? In other words, your app, or your studio. And as part of that work activity, are you climbing up it, or are you lifting somebody with it? And I guess those are the two avenues to go down. So if you're climbing up it, then you would inspect it under the work equipment regulations.
Yeah.
If it's lifting you, or you're lifting another person with it, so I pull on a rope through a purchase system and it lifts Heidi off the ground to do whatever the act is, then in that case that would absolutely be lifting people. The fact that Heidi would be working at height, well indeed I'd be working at height as well by providing the lifting. I think that might be a red herring to go down. Primarily I would worry about the work at height regs with respect to things like fall arrest harnesses and lanyards. It's probably easier that way.
So if
and you're rigging equipment in a church hall or something like that, and you were using equipment to gain access to height to the rig, whether that's building maybe a truss structure or whether it's hanging points in a church hall even, then the equipment that you'd use to prevent yourself falling or to gain access would be something inspected under the work at height rig.
Gotcha.
So a ladder, almost certainly. A scaffold tower, definitely. It's more relevant than the provision and use of work equipment regs. But in truth, you could use the work pure for a scaffold tower in the same way.
Gotcha. So in reality then, for most of the things that we're looking at within Circus, they're probably going to fall under.
I think most people have heard of Lola, and it worries them because the onus is certainly on the employer to be proactive, should we say. And if people are catching up fast, then they naturally jump on what they hear about, which is always Lola. But in fact, Lola is almost a subdivision of Pure. It's not new, it's been around for quite a long time. But what it's talking about is any equipment that's provided by an employer for use at work. Separate to that, Pure talks very much actually about the risk assessment requirement of another set of regulations, just to bore you completely, called the management regs, which are the important ones, or the management of health and safety at work regulations 1999 to be precise. And that has a regulation 3, which is all about risk assessment. And what it simply says in Pure is that whilst undertaking or whilst discharging the duties that an employer has in providing work equipment, you have to relate that to the risk assessment. So put it in English, if you provide equipment that creates a risk, so any of the things we can see in shot at the moment present a risk if they weren't to work properly, and it could be getting your fingers stuck in a pulley, it could be the shackle for some reason's got wear and tear beyond a reasonable limit, or the round slings have been exposed to heat or chemicals or sharp edges or something like that, then you might end up letting go and falling, or it might break and drop you. particularly if you're being lifted by it. I mean, hence the extra risk that you've got to take account of in lifting regulations. So go back to pure. The important thing is there a risk involved? Yes, there is. Well, if there is a risk involved, then you need. May well be a colour code, but it's not mandatory, whereas in Europe it is.
Indeed.
So, should we start with the round sling?
Yeah, let's do that, and let's compare one against the other. So if we're taking an example, so Heidi, if you'd like to pull up a round sling. So if we consider that we've done an inspection and it's passed with regards to the physical inspection of the material, when we start to record this using the round sling as an example, but in both cases, one under Lola and one under as work equipment.
Absolutely.
So what are we doing next?
If it was, I mean, just to reiterate one point before we do that, the first sort of filter, if you like, is are you providing it in an environment where you're responsible for providing equipment? In other words, your employer, you operate a studio, a club, a youth group, summer school, anything like that, where you're providing it to other people to use, and there's a risk in using it. If you're using it at home or you're using it on your own premises, in your garage, or you have access to a high point to practice, then it's not really relevant because nobody else is at risk but yourself, and you're not at work, so you can move on from that. If you are at work, then under pure, you would first identify and describe it. So we've got a 1 ton round sling.
Yep, a 1 ton round sling.
So you would look for the identifying mark, which is normally a serial number, but it doesn't have to be, in all fairness. If you've only got 2 and you want to call one Jill and one Jack, that's fine. So the serial number's at the bottom there, great big long number as a rule, 9 figures or 8 figures or something.
Yep.
You'd write that in the column next to the item, so you'd put 1 ton round. Have you got an EWL there, Heidi?
God. Yeah. What does it say?
1.
Oh, EWL of 1.
Good. 1 unit. So I'm assuming it's a 1 meter, in other words, a 2 meter circumference.
Yeah,
something that has caused huge problems over the years. The EWL is half the circumference.
Yeah.
That's the easiest way to describe it. So if that says 1, it's a 2 meter circumference, or 1 meter EWL. So you'd record 1 ton polyester round sling. You know it's polyester because it's got a blue label, and it probably says PES somewhere. So 1 ton, 1 meter EWL, and then the serial number against that in the column for the identifying mark. one of those gives us
Hang on a
any
second,
ground.
Chris. I think I've just made something of an error, which I need to just fix, because we've been focusing on the documents, and I don't think anyone could hear us at that particular point. So give me just 1 second to fix that for when I come back to here. 1 second. Apologies to anyone listening. I made a slight error on the setup. So now hopefully on this screen everyone can at least hear me. I'm just going to add Chris in as well, so big apologies for that, and we'll focus back in here as well. So now everyone should be able to hear the both of us on this particular page. So just a quick summary from this that we've been talking about. We have not spent quite as much time on this and more with that, but looking at the two differences between these, and the last point that we made was on the right we can see details of any action taken because of a matter in the comments column, whereas within this one we don't have a comments column or other things that were related to it, but that is information that we should record, so that the owner of the equipment actually knows what actions have been taken as well, and that does seem to be something which came up in the regs itself.
Yeah, absolutely. So Lola has a list of prescribed particulars that you need to record, whereas Pure leaves it very much to the competent person who's been appointed to carry out the inspection. I think just using the different words is probably a good idea. So it's inspection for Pure, thorough examination for Lola. You can inspect under Lola as well, but ultimately it's a report of thorough inspection.
Yeah.
Replaced what we all used to call test certs for years and years.
Very good.
Because there won't necessarily be any physical testing. The testing is against standards and often made visually, so it's a bit like an MOT. Very little actual load testing, should we say, involved.
Yeah, indeed. So if we're going back and looking again at any of the equipment, from any of these, is there anything that we would pick out from this for one over the other? Is there anything that we would say that, you know, if you're inspecting a pulley under work equipment as instead of under Lola, is there any differences or round slings or carabiners or anything else?
Well, I think the essential thing is to decide what you're using it for, and if there's the possibility exists that you're going to combine what we can see at the moment to make an assembly which is going to be used for lifting people, then you've got to inspect under Lola, absolutely. If you've got a dedicated pulley with a line over it that is only to swag away a silk, or 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 swag away a.
Okay, nice. Most of the ground when it comes to the documents themselves, wow. Hold on 1 second, I've got a few problems that are happening here. Loving this system. Let me just start this again. If I bring it up, it should be behaving a little bit more reliably. There we go. Chris, can you hear me?
Yes.
Excellent. Right, we're good. We're still on. So all the fun of the fair. Excellent. So if I switch back briefly to the documents as we have them here. So the summary of what we're looking at here is we need to decide what the equipment's being used for, and then against that we've got different things. So I'm hoping that with these we can make these two documents available to link through from the article that we have in that relates to this live stream. Now, what we're looking at here, like there's a small amount of equipment which could be recorded on the one on the left. There's a number of rows that are in there, and again there's a small number, like 6, 7, 8 pieces of equipment that you can inspect on each one. And obviously these are all done on paper, but if we are releasing the Word documents, there's a limitation within that for each inspection. So some of the original templates that I got from manufacturers would be forms which were one piece of equipment for each, one document for each piece of equipment. At least here we've got a template where we've got more. If we wanted to expand beyond that, where we had dozens or hundreds of pieces of equipment, how would we record it in that regard? Would we just keep adding rows to that same document? Will we have multiple documents, or can we record it in a spreadsheet?
As long as it can be reproduced, I don't think it matters these days. In the UK, at least, there's no requirement to make it look like anything in particular, provided you can show that a competent person has performed whatever the inspection or thorough examination is, that it should have under the regulations. So there's no point wasting your time doing it under Lola with all those details that have to be there if it's not actually lifting somebody. And I've come across this, I'm sure we all have, many times, where somebody who is doing perhaps a 1 hour class once a week in a church hall with 5 silks hung up, and they're spending a lot of money on getting the equipment inspected under Lola, which is just crazy. The reality is that the person inspecting it, if that is the case, the person inspecting it absolutely will know what to look for in a round sling, but you can if you read the manufacturer's information as well. Sad but true.
Yeah, indeed. So, I mean, under those circumstances where a teacher has maybe 5 or 6 pieces of, or 5 or 6 silks hanging up from a rig or truss or from the ceiling, and it's been put in that way, when it comes, or even perhaps even had ceiling points put in, the difference between those two would be on the frequency of inspection. Would we do it any more or any less?
That's why the law's written the way it is. It's down to the competent person, because if you appoint a competent person, that person, for example, in the case of, let's say, fixings into a concrete slab, that's not unusual. You're going to need to get the people back who did the installation, or somebody of similar experience who can look at it and say, yep, that's still good to use. And has access to the information, which it may not be their thing. It wouldn't be for me. I'd have to say to you, what are you using these for? You tell me, we use that for a cloud swing or something. And then you say, what's a cloud swing? You'd explain or even demonstrate, so that the person's got that information. If the person's competent, they'll be asking you those questions. Now, if they already know and they don't need to, that's fair enough, because they obviously do have that competence. And as we go forward, more and more of those people are available, clearly. There's a number of companies who've, they've worked from the tools up, and they have an entertainment background rather than perhaps a more traditional industrial lifting background or whatever. But I can't say it often enough. Make sure the kit is being used for lifting if you're inspecting it under Lola, and if it isn't, then there's no need to. The fact that it's manufactured like carabiners we can see in shot next to the shackles, as far as we're concerned, they're almost doing the same job, but neither of them are being used in a way that the manufacturer ever intended, actually. They're made to a far higher standard than we actually need very often.
So a variety of rescue pulleys might be used in a much wider variety of circumstances than people envisaged.
Yeah,
sure.
Absolutely. I mean, all the pulleys you can see there would be almost certainly provided by a supplier of particularly PPE rather than lifting equipment or work equipment. Who knows what they're going to be used for? A large number of those types of pulleys are used for rescue, in rescue kits and so forth. But we're not using it for that. So it may not be lifting people. If it is, then it's Lola, absolutely, particularly if you're going into other venues, because there is a requirement under Pure and Lola, because they come from the same source originally, that you've got to have this reproducible report of inspection or thorough examination as is appropriate to take with you or to make available in the venue that you're going to.
Yeah, indeed. Good. So having covered last time how to inspect, which was really helpful. This time recording is relatively simple by contrast, because we've got a few options, and if you've got the templates themselves and obviously the experience to be able to inspect, then the rest of that looks like it would be fairly simple to be able to fill these in and to be able to support them.
Yep, absolutely. This is why it's so important to make sure that the information is present and legible. So in the case of those pulleys that we can see, the big ones, they're made by a company called ISC. They have a model number on, which I think from memory one's 56 and one's 54 or something like that. And then somewhere on there they'll have a serial number as well. And it's a question we often laugh up our sleeves when people have written down the EN number under the serial number, which is always when all the serial numbers have the same. It doesn't make sense.
Exactly.
So there we go. We've got. I'm guessing that the long number, I should say, is starting 19, and there's a good chance the 19 may refer to the year of manufacture, but I don't know. I'd have to check ISC's documentation. But you wouldn't need to write down anything there apart from ISC RP, rescue pulley 064, serial number 1911, whatever the rest of it is, ending 24, EN 12278. 2007, you wouldn't have to record that. You might want to put down that it's designed to be used between whatever it says, 8 is it, and 13 mil rope. And this is the difficulty in understanding the difference between a braking load and a working load limit. On the one that we're looking at, you can see at the top it says minimum braking strength. I'm guessing it's 50 kilonewtons. Yeah, 50.
It is, yeah.
And then on either side, so it's designed to lift a maximum of 2.5 tons on either side, at which point it's going to brake.
Yeah.
So if there's a safe working load mark, which there should be, which is the employer's reduction to account for the application, then that should be on the Lola certificate.
Gotcha.
If it's being used to swag a hoop out of the way, even though you could argue there is a risk if it was to fail and the hoop was to swing down and clout somebody, but it's not lifting a person. I would say that was work equipment, not lifting equipment, personally.
Interesting.
Yeah. I mean, if it was lifting something from its show position vertically upwards, and the load is of significance, sort of, let's say 5 kilos and above, in other words, it could hurt somebody, then it is definitely work equipment, but it probably is lifting equipment as well. So it brings us back to the same old, as you may as well just inspect it under Lola. Yeah. If there's any doubt. But you've got to contrast that against the silk hanging on the round sling, hanging on the figure 8, hanging on the carabiner, around the church hall roof beam. That ain't lifting equipment.
No, indeed. No, absolutely. Very good. I mean,
likewise, swivels are probably a really good example, actually. If the swivel's on a lifting system and you are lifting somebody whilst they are rotating or might rotate, then, that's lifting equipment. If it's simply to stop things getting tangled up on what we'd call a dead hang off a beam or a rigging point, then I wouldn't worry about Lola. Yeah, keeping it simple. And very good. Those both look to be good quality ones. You'll find that certainly on the Petzl one, you'll find a serial number.
Have we got a serial number on that one there, Heidi?
This one.
Yep.
The one that we're looking at, the
be a long
the one on the right, the
number.
black and.
That's it. We can zoom in on that a bit so people can see.
Oh, there we go.
The bottom figure on the black half, 19F. So 19 is the year, F is the month. A, B, C, D, E, F. So that would be June 2019. And then the rest of the numbers mean something to Petzl. They don't mean much to us, but Petzl will be able to do a recall or give you information about anything you need to check. So that would be a Petzl swivel, which on the other side I'm fairly sure will have a number. I can't remember the Petzl code for it, but have a look on the other side, Heidi. Is there a number like P100 or something? Oh, swivel, there you go. After the swivel, does it say swivel L or something?
Swivel L, yeah.
So swivel L is the model. So you'd record that as a Petzl swivel L, and then the long number that we just looked at in the column for the serial number. And that would be the same for either report of inspection or thorough examination.
So is that a barcode that I saw on the other side?
It probably is. Now, it's difficult. Sometimes it's a barcode which takes you to what the Petzl used to call the technical download, I think. Or sometimes it might just take you effectively to the catalogue, as it were. And I think you get a bit of both. And I'm sure that will develop. I wouldn't be at all surprised to find there are products already where you can perhaps, go straight to a report of inspection for it. Different manufacturers do things in slightly different ways. As ever, read the manual. Whatever it came with, it'll tell you.
Very good. Excellent.
Being humans in the entertainment industry, we tend to rip that off and get on with rigging it for the show, and then when we come back to read it in our quieter moments, it's gone.
Yeah, indeed. So, out of any of the other equipment there's obviously things that we should record and that we shouldn't record from each one. Do you want to pull out a bow shackle and a carabiner, Heidi? Because we kind of covered those last week, but just to reiterate it this week in relation to the documentation itself.
So this is a steel D-shaped carabiner, very traditional screw gate. It's got quite a lot of markings on it. What you need to know is the manufacturer's mark, which will depend because a lot of these get badged by different manufacturers. If it's got 3 circles with 2 Fs, it's almost certainly a company called Foyne, French company, and they will either put a batch number on, or sometimes you've got a serial number, which it looks like there is a serial number on that one.
Not so sure. I mean, I think we've put an aerial edge serial number stenciled onto this.
Yeah. Well, that would do. So the manufacturer almost certainly would have just put a 2-letter code, let's say AB, which you'll see on the other side, I think. That's your aerial edge one I see as it just went over. Yeah. You've got, is that BX or DX in the middle?
EX.
Yeah, so that will be the batch number, of which there might be many. But I don't suppose you've probably got more than 10 out of that box that are all the same batch. And if you've engraved them to make them truly unique, which you have, if you can just rotate them so we can see the back of the spine, Heidi, where it says AE, I think.
Yeah.
AR.
AR, is it?
Hopefully, I thought it was AE, but it might be AR. And it's the first 2 letters of aerial edge, so I guess so.
There you go. And then there's a dash, and what's that, 0025, is it?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I wouldn't bother with the manufacturer's batch. I'd use your number because that will have been thought about. It might even be sequential.
Probably was from then. I think that's Imogen's good work.
Inevitably, what you'll find is at some point you get to a really scrappy-looking report of inspection, and you want to sort of organise it a bit and put it in numerical order and things. But that's a joy to be had later down the line. So that is definitely the unique code, the unique identifying number that I would use. Don't be put off with the CE mark or the manufacturer's marks or anything like that. Use that one. So that would be a 10mm steel offset. Sorry, not offset. Steel 10mm steel screw gate carabiner. And if you want to put Foyne as the manufacturer, that can't hurt. But the fact that it's got AE or AR 0025, that immediately focuses it down to be one piece of equipment. End of story.
Excellent.
And what about the alloy carabiners? Because they probably are Petzl, and they probably do have a serial number, which is the manufacturer's one rather than yours. If it's already got one on it that's going to be unique, I wouldn't worry about putting your own on. So there's quite a lot of information there which we can't see. It looks under your thumbnail there. I think that is the serial number.
It's a very tiny serial number, isn't it?
If it's, yeah, absolutely. If it's not there, it'll be on the back of the spine in the same way as yours, as long as it's on a straight part. But it uses the same convention. If it's a Petzl one, it'll start with 2 digits for the year and then the letter for the month. Unless it's before 2016, in which case they use numbers. Yeah, that's CE0082, I think. So you wouldn't put that down anywhere. That's just the notified body that did the type testing.
So, could you tell me a little bit about that? Because this came up last time, and I don't have a lot of knowledge about that. So that number there, 0082, what is a notified body?
A notified body is, or a notified body was, I'll come back to that, post-Brexit. A notified body still is in Europe, a body appointed by the nation, the member state concerned, to ensure that the product, if it's being manufactured as PPE in this case, meets the standards that the PPE regulation requires, what used to be the PPE directive. Post-Brexit for us, it's called an authorised body, but the same basic principles apply. So that will be, well, in that case it is, a company called Apave Sud in Marseille, who I think are aeronautical engineers originally, but they do a lot of Article 11 testing, it's called, for people like Petzl, BMM, Edelrid, whoever, to ensure that their products meet the standard, because it has to be carried out by a third party. And their registration number, in this case, is 0082.
So a lot of equipment that's out there, there's obviously rules around testing, and this may be a bit of an aside from an inspection point of view, but it's it's a point that I'm not that clear on. So all of this equipment is inspected by an external body, or what's the ruling around that, and how does that work?
Yeah, the notified body, well, I can give you an example. At Total, we used to make I suppose technically we still do. If you want to put a piece of PPE onto the market, or a medical product that's covered by a directive, there's a number of products that are covered by these directives. You have to use a third party to come in and not only check that it meets the requirements that the directive makes, but also that your manufacturing and testing quality assurance, if you like, is still there as well. So they'll come in on a scheduled basis. They don't abseil in the dead of night and nick your stuff, but they take it back to the lab and break it, as it were, to make sure that it still does the job that it's supposed to do. And that has to be done by an independent notified body, yes. And there is a process to become a notified body as well.
Gotcha. And that's specific to PPE regulations?
PPE, medical stuff covered by the Medical Products Directive, I think it's called. There are others, but you're normally going to see it on a piece of PPE. Yeah. These days, of course, for us in the good old UK, post-Brexit, it won't be a CE 0082, it'll be a UKCA followed by the 4 numbers of the authorised body.
Yeah, very good.
Of which there are 10,000, thereabouts.
Oh, wow, okay. Because obviously this is a number that we see quite a lot.
Yeah. And that's why I was saying before, it beggars belief sometimes. You look at people's inspection records for their PPE, and where it says serial number, it'll often say CE 0082 EN 362 for every piece of equipment. And the reason is because that's nothing to do with the serial.
Yeah, it's an interesting point there. So when it comes to PPE regs, is serial number often part of that? Because obviously in the lifting industry we don't see very much in the way of serial numbers on a lot of that equipment, but I'm often seeing it in PPE.
Yeah, if the product's intended to be used as PPE, like that carabiner that Heidi's got is, you can use it for putting your keys on your belt if you want, but it's designed to be used as part of a connector in a 4S system, then yes, it does have to have all those markings on there by directive.
Wow.
Absolutely.
And if we were going to contrast that with one of the steel carabiners, there's obviously a different set of markings on those, but it doesn't come under in its own right Lola.
No, it certainly wouldn't come under Lola, but the requirement is exactly the same. It's still EN 362, which is the requirement for a connector in a 4S system. Gotcha. You could make it out of cheese if you wanted to, but it has to comply with the standard. Right. So it would be a very big piece of cheese. Big piece of cheese.
That's pretty strong cheese, I think.
Yeah.
Excellent. All right, good.
Cheese.
All right, that's really good. So, I mean, we've covered most of the things that I can see that we've got certainly brought there on the table, which is a good thing. I'm just trying to see if I can find any section of the comments. I don't think we've necessarily got anything so far, but if anyone's got any questions, please put them into the chat. Oh, I'm in the right place now. Or if you're watching this afterwards, then feel free to put them in the chat afterwards, and I will get to them in the course of our time. So one of the requests which came from last time it was very much about finding equipment that we could do a show and tell on that was not good equipment. So examples of equipment that have kind of failed. Which was the sort of thing that they were looking for. So I had a lot of examples of that, but I have thrown a lot of kit away in the latest moves that we've done, but I'm going to start to build that back up again. And we've got a few little ones, but nothing really big. Is that something that you have a lot of yourself?
Yeah, I've got quite an extensive museum of objects that haven't made it. Absolutely.
Excellent. I think that might be the occasion for a road trip and a video at some point in time. If you're up. Do
you want to quickly have a look at those shackles? Have we got time?
Yeah, if you've got time, yeah, for sure. Yeah,
absolutely. You apply the same theory. You've got a bunch of shackles there, many of which I think are identical. So you've got to be able to identify the one you're looking at uniquely under Lola, but even if it's only to join a sling to hang a silk in our studio, then there's markings on there to use. And the fact that it says working load limit 3¼ tons quite clearly, you can see on the side there, is almost irrelevant to us. And the fact that it's got a 6-to-1 safety factor, or that it's made of grade 6 steel, which you can also see marked, is almost irrelevant. But it gives you lots of good information that you can describe it with. So it is a 3¼ ton alloy bow shackle, screw pin alloy bow shackle, if you want to be really precise, as opposed to a safety shackle, with a sort of the nut and bolt type arrangement. It's got LG at the top, which is the manufacturer. I'm guessing, I'd have to check, but I think F1 on the side there is probably a batch, if that's what it says. You've got slightly obscured, but 5/8 just underneath the shiny sticker there, which I don't know if it's stuck on or whether you can move it. Sometimes you can slide
I think that one's
down.
stuck on.
Yeah, this is the difficulty.
Do you have some there that aren't that shows that clearly?
There you go. So that's F2, I think, or F7. I can't see that precisely, or FZ maybe. So that distinguishes it straight away from the other one, which to the naked eye, as it were, it would look very similar. It's also a 1/2 inch rather than it's a working load limit of 2 tons. There's the power of photography for you, because I thought it was a 3¼ ton. It was just out of shot, as it were. But if you pick up another one which is marked working load limit 2 tons, has it got the same batch number on it? If it has, if it also says F2 or FZ or whatever it was, then you might have to add another digit to try and make them uniquely identifiable.
Tons F1. So we've got F1 and F2 here.
There you go. So if they're the same item, one's a 2 ton, the other's a 2 ton, both CMA, both LG, both grade 6 material, one F2, one F1. Well, by the time you've worked your way all the way through the box, if those are the only 2 with those 2 markings on, you don't need to do any more. But if you can find another 10 with F1 on, you really should have some method of, and it may be what the blue labels are about, some method of distinguishing F1 from F1.1, F1.2, F1.3, etc.
Yeah.
Whether we really need to or not is another matter, and there is, I mean, it goes back 15 years, if not longer than that, to my certain knowledge, quite high-level debate whether we actually need to do that, because Crosby in particular are probably the biggest manufacturer, American company, but global in reach, and they are very always adamant that they can tell you exactly where each shackle came from without there being an individual serial number on it. But there are plenty of insurance companies who insist on having an individual number, and you can see there, thank you very much, you've got that uniquely identified. I don't know if that says TM or JM or what it is, but
that's IM, I believe.
Is it IM? There we go. And then SH4. So it doesn't take a rocket scientist to work out how you could find out what that means.
Yeah.
The information, including the phone number, I think. So we should probably rotate that out of shot. You could easily get hold of the person who put that information on there and ask what convention had been used, so that you can make sense of your inventory, as it were. So it's obviously been done by somebody who knows what they're doing, and you can always get on the phone to them.
Yeah, indeed. Very good.
So in terms of recording, you do exactly the same as you would for anything else. What is it? It's, in this case, it's a black painted steel shackle, I believe. Screw pin alloy shackle. Then some means of identifying it from all the other screw pin alloy bow shackles that you've got.
So one number, or one thing that uniquely identifies that piece of equipment, and then a description which will enable anyone who's working there to be able to find that piece of equipment.
Absolutely.
Or find that serial number.
Yeah.
So good.
And
go ahead.
I was just going to say, to give you a silly anecdote, really, but it makes the point. We used to have 2 testing frames at work. One was painted blue, a sort of an overhead gantry. One was painted blue and one was just self-covered steel. And our insurance guy really used to have problems with the fact that I'd recorded it as the painted one. And he said, well, what are you going to call the other one? And I said, well, it's the other one, isn't it? One's painted and one isn't. And they were clearly uniquely identifiable by that alone, because we only had 2. but it really caused him all. He wanted me to paint number 1, number 2 on there, and you're thinking, well, okay, but just to make the point, you know. So that's what it's all about, so that there is no doubt as you approach the ground supported truss rig that you can see in the distance behind the shackle box. As you approach that, if you've got 2 of those, you need to be able to know which bits fit which system.
Yeah.
And are they interchangeable? Yes, probably. Have each of them been inspected enough, even when they are interchangeable, to make sure that all the bits were inspected before it was put together? And this is where it can get quite complicated. If you look at the guys going down, you can just see in the right of the picture there, there's a number of components there. Are they put together ad hoc, as it were, or is it a dedicated system that you will number as system number 1? Probably not. The good news is that it's not lifting equipment, so you could argue it doesn't matter, provided it's fit for purpose, and you've got a method of proving that you've inspected it.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
It totally does. Very good. So, is there anything else we should cover on this topic today, Chris?
I think we've probably covered it all in sort of piecemeal fashion. And really, to summarize, I think the important thing is, first, do you need to be doing it at all?
Yeah.
And yes, you do. Everybody does, because if it fails, you might hurt yourself or somebody else.
Yeah.
If you are providing it for somebody else, you absolutely have to make sure it's safe. And I'm sure your insurance company will be the first to tell you that, apart from the legal requirements.
Yeah.
But then if you are in that situation, are you using it as work equipment, or are you using it as lifting equipment?
Yeah.
And there are going to be, for example, those 2 blue bins, I wouldn't mind betting that both, or either, whichever way, have been used in both situations. And if that's the case, from a business point of view, it makes absolute sense to inspect them under Lola, because then there's no doubt about their provenance.
Yeah, I mean, that from our point of view, doing both, it made much more sense to follow Lola than it did to follow Pure. Just for simplicity's sake. And There was always equipment which was used for lifting, and there's always equipment, and a lot of it was interchangeable.
Yeah, I mean, if you've got an act which is, I don't know, I knew a chap once who had an act with a spaceship. Him and his partner used to sort of do a balancing act on this spaceship, which flew out, rotated, and flew back in again, and that was it. Quite a small amount of equipment, but every single piece in there was absolutely lifting equipment for lifting people. So Lola applies. End of story.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Very good. Simple guidelines for that, and nicely summarised there to make that simple. So once this video is finished, what we'll do over the next couple of days is link a couple of these templates to the article on the website. And you can come there, and if you want copies of those, then you can download them from there. Or if you go and have a look at one of the previous articles that we've got on inspection, then we've actually, at the end of that article, put the Lola list of everything there that needed to be recorded. But also that article covers the different types of inspection that can be done under the different regulations for that as well, if you want to use that for reference. So for today, I'd say thank you very much to Gabrielle and Heidi, who've been showing us their wares, and thanks very much, Chris, for all of your expertise for this particular broadcast. So I'm going to pause the live stream about now, and thanks everybody for watching. And if you want to go to our site, www.circusrigging.info, and if you want to support us, then please subscribe, and we'll see you